She never objected to her father's second marriage. She only hoped it would make him happy. 3 years after losing his first wife, 79-year-old Walter Simmons married Diane. At first, she seemed like the perfect partner. Then her son, Tyler Cross, quietly moved into Walter's life. Soon, he wasn't just living in the house, he was helping make business decisions. By the time Walter passed away, his $3.7 million estate belonged entirely to Diane. His devoted daughter, Karen, had been erased. It looked like a grieving husband had simply chosen his wife over his daughter, but one former business partner walked into the courtroom with evidence that changed everything. The inheritance wasn't the first thing Tyler had taken. Stay with us until the very end, because today's story proves that the most dangerous family betrayals don't always begin with a new will. Sometimes they begin the day the wrong person is welcomed into the family. Walter Simmons was 79 years old and had spent his career building a regional logistics company in Memphis, Tennessee that moved commercial freight across 6 states. He had founded the business in 1981 with 2 trucks and a warehouse lease he could barely afford, and had grown it over 4 decades into an operation that employed 43 people and carried contracts with some of the largest retailers in the Mid-South. His estate, including the business, his home, and investment accounts, accumulated over a lifetime of careful management, was valued at $3.7 million. His daughter, Karen, 46, had grown up watching her father build the company and had maintained a close relationship with him through every stage of her adult life. She had her own career in healthcare and had never taken a formal role in the business, but she had always understood its importance to her father and had respected the discipline and integrity with which he had run it. When her mother passed in 2018, Karen had been her father's primary support through the brief and had watched with cautious hope as Walter gradually re-engaged with the social world around him. Walter met Diane Cross at a church event in 2020 and married her 14 months later. Diane was 58, warm in social settings, and attentive to Walter in ways that appeared genuine during the early period of the relationship. Karen had reservations she never fully expressed, rooted less in anything specific than in a general caution about the speed of the attachment and the significant financial difference in their circumstances. She chose not to voice them. Her father was happy, and she believed that happiness deserved the benefit of her doubt. Tyler, 35, appeared in Walter's life approximately 4 months after the wedding, initially for a visit that extended into a stay and then into a permanent presence that no one had formally discussed or agreed to. Tyler had a background in commercial real estate and presented himself to Walter as someone who could bring useful perspective to the logistics company's operations. Walter, who had always been open to capable people regardless of where they came from, allowed Tyler into several business meetings during the first year. Karen noticed Tyler's growing presence but could not identify a specific objection that felt proportionate to raise. He was polite when she visited. He was clearly valued by her father. She told herself she was being protective in a way that was unfair to someone who had not yet done anything wrong. Tyler spent the first year studying the business the way someone studies something they intend to own. He identified the key vendor relationships, the most valuable contracts, and the financial structures that were least visible to outside review. He cultivated a relationship with the company's controller and positioned himself as an informal advisor to Walter on decisions that Walter's longtime business partner, a man named Harold Pierce, was not always present to weigh in on. Harold Pierce, 64, had been Walter's business partner since 1989. He held a minority ownership stake in the company and had worked alongside Walter through every significant decision the business had ever made. He had not been informed of Tyler's involvement until after it had become established fact. When Harold raised concerns about Tyler's access to the company's financial systems, Walter told Harold Tyler was simply helping and Harold was being unnecessarily territorial. Harold was not being territorial. He was watching Tyler redirect vendor payment authorizations through a secondary authorization channel Tyler had established with the controller, a channel Harold discovered only when a vendor called him directly to confirm a payment that had not appeared in the company's standard records. The payment had gone through. The funds had gone somewhere other than where the invoice indicated. Harold documented what he found and said nothing to Walter immediately. He continued documenting for 4 months. In late 2022, as Walter's health declined following a cardiac event, Tyler and Diane moved the estate planning process forward. Walter's original will, which had divided the business equally between Karen and a charitable trust he had established years earlier, was replaced by a revised document naming Diane as sole beneficiary of the full estate, including the business. Karen was not mentioned. The revision was arranged through a document preparation service Tyler had identified, and Walter signed it during a period when his physician had documented significant fatigue and reduced cognitive engagement following his cardiac treatment. Walter Simmons passed away in March of 2023. The revised will was filed within the week. Karen retained attorney Susan Ford, a probate litigator in Memphis with 17 years of experience, the day she learned she had no claim under the current document. Susan filed the will contest immediately and contacted Harold Pierce within the first week of investigation after Karen mentioned his name as her father's longtime business partner. Harold arrived at Susan's office with 4 months of documented evidence in a folder he had been keeping in his home safe since the previous autumn. The documentation showed a systematic pattern of payment redirections executed through the secondary authorization channel Tyler had established, totaling $430,000 diverted from the company's accounts to a commercial entity registered in Tyler's personal name. Harold had recorded the dates, the amounts, the vendor accounts involved, and the destination transfers with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 34 years ensuring that every number in his business was exactly where it was supposed to be. Susan retained a forensic accountant who spent 2 weeks validating and expanding Harold's documentation. The accountant identified additional diversions Harold had not yet discovered, bringing the total misappropriated from the business to $680,000 across 14 months of Tyler's involvement. Susan also obtained Walter's medical records from the period surrounding the will signing. The records were consistent and clear. Walter's cardiologist had documented that his patient was experiencing significant fatigue and reduced capacity for complex decision-making during his recovery, and had noted that Walter had seemed confused during a follow-up appointment about a business meeting he believed had taken place on a date when he had actually been hospitalized. The hearing was held before the Honorable Judge Raymond Holt at the Shelby County Probate Court. Susan Ford presented the forensic financial analysis, Harold's original documentation, Walter's medical records from the signing period, and the registration records for the commercial entity into which Tyler had redirected the company's funds. She called Harold Pierce to testify. Harold sat in the witness box at 64 years old and walked the court through every document he had collected with the same precision he had applied to 4 decades of business records. He described the moment he had noticed the secondary authorization channel, the decision he had made to document rather than confront, and the 4 months during which he had watched Tyler continue the pattern while building a case he could not dismiss. He told the court he had kept everything because he had worked alongside Walter Simmons for 34 years, and he was not going to let someone take what Walter had built without a complete record of exactly how it had been done.
Tyler's attorney argued that his business involvement had been authorized by Walter and that any financial arrangements had been within the scope of that authorization. Susan Ford presented the secondary authorization channel documentation and asked the court to identify which element of Walter's authorization had included permission to redirect vendor payments to a commercial entity registered in Tyler's personal name without disclosure to the company's controller, its longtime partner, or its owner. There was no answer. Diane's attorney argued the will reflected Walter's genuine final wishes to provide for his wife. Susan Ford presented the medical records and asked the court to weigh those wishes against a document signed during a period when Walter's own cardiologist had documented significant cognitive compromise, arranged by a person who had been simultaneously misappropriating funds from Walter's company, using a document preparation service chosen specifically because it required no independent attorney review. Judge Raymond Holt ruled the revised will invalid, finding that Walter had lacked the capacity to provide informed consent and that the circumstances of the signing indicated deliberate exploitation of his medical vulnerability. He ordered the estate distributed according to Walter's original will, with the business passing to the estate for proper administration and the charitable trust provisions honored as Walter had originally intended. He ordered full restitution for the business fund misappropriations and referred Tyler Cross to the Shelby County District Attorney for criminal fraud and theft from a business. Tyler was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in Tennessee State Prison. Diane was not criminally charged, but was ordered to return assets she had received following Walter's death that were traceable to the diverted funds. Karen Walters worked with Harold Pierce to stabilize the company in the months following the proceedings. Harold remained as managing partner through a transition period while a buyer was identified. The company was eventually sold to a regional competitor that retained 39 of the 43 employees. Karen told Harold after the sale was completed that her father had always said Harold was the most reliable person he had ever worked with. Harold told her Walter had said the same thing about her. Walter Simmons built something honest and dependable. The person who had been welcomed into his family as a son-in-law spent 14 months quietly taking from it before anyone with the evidence to prove it was ready to speak. The court ensured that the man who kept everything was the one who made the difference. Would you have noticed the warning signs in a new family member's involvement in your parents' business? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Court of Shadows for more courtroom drama stories every week.